Hello again. We are back this time with a session from Gabi Steele, who is one of the co-founders and CEOs of Preql. She's also a co-founder and executive board member of Data Culture, and formerly was an adjunct lecturer at the Carson School of Design and head of data visualization at WeWork. Today, Gabi is going to be talking about the gap between business and data. With that, Gabi, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Folks, if you have any questions, feel free to add them in while Gabi is presenting.
Thank you, Ali. Good to be here. My co-founder, Leah, was going to be here, but you have me today, and I will be representing her. And I'm going to be talking about this gap between the business and the data, which could be represented in a few other titles. But before I get to that, just a little bit more about my background. As Ali mentioned, I originally come from a design background, sort of a data space. I was in the data visualization realm. I led data visualization at WeWork, and I was previously at the Washington Post. And then later, my co-founder and I, Leah, started this data consultancy, Data Culture, and recently we've started this new product company, Preql. So this idea about the gap between the business and the data has actually been a part of my work for as long as I've been in data, but there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about it. And one fun one that I was just looking at, I was like in my Notion today looking at my blog post brainstorms, not to give too much away about the blog posts that are going to come out, but what we're talking about here is this issue of getting data to business users and getting the data team in a place where they can support business users. So I call it the data transformation problem. That's really what Preql is focused on, but it could also be, why is building a central source of truth so hard? The broken promises of the modern data stack is a little dicier. Why don't the numbers match? That's a really big part of what we're going to be talking about. This issue, the code base versus the data consumers. So a lot of fun titles could have been put here. But yeah, this is my take on it. So when I talk to people about this issue, the first kind of thing that we're all aware of here probably is that it's really difficult to get value from data because there's so many steps in this process. You need to ingest data, then you store it, then you transform it, and eventually get to a place where you can visualize it. What's good is that the modern data stack has solved for so many parts of this problem. When it comes to ingestion, tools like Fivetran and Stitch and Airbyte have put us in a really good spot. It's something that used to take many, many months. It can be done in days, sometimes hours. Storage, Snowflake's got us covered. It's cheaper than it's ever been. It's super fast to do computing. Transformation, which you can probably guess, that's still pretty manual. dbt has helped in many ways, though. And then visualization. You have kind of like unlimited data visualization tools when it comes to Looker, Power BI, Tableau. Everything's kind of out there. Sigma computing, I've implemented a lot. This transformation problem, though, it still requires hundreds of lines of custom code. So that's where Preql sits. It integrates. We're very friendly with dbt, but dbt really is for engineers to use. What I've been trying to do for a long time is think about how can we help business users as well as engineers. And we've implemented dbt kind of like exclusively at Data Culture when implementing this modern stack, but we still run across this issue. And one way to think about it is this problem, which is any larger organization, this is like a moment for anybody that's been on a data team at a company or is an analytics engineer today, you get asked a question even as basic as how many customers do we have? And you need to go back to that business user and say, oh, it's going to take a few weeks to figure out. And it causes real tension because like, why should it take so long? Why are we paying so many brilliant engineers to be working on this problem? But on the data side, there's a lot of logic that's required to answer a question that simple. And this is the point of tension that has pushed us to start thinking about this Preql product. And the problem also has a bunch of other kind of like sub-problems within an organization. So we've broken them out. We like to talk about them as cultural, talent, and workflow. So business people don't always know how complicated it is on the data side. And data people aren't so well-versed in every part of the business problem because that's not their day-to-day. And there's a lot of ways that I can talk about people tackling this, but this is really, really common. The black box system problem, everybody's got their own kind of black box. There's a mentality also kind of gatekeeping when it comes to the technical side of things, not believing business users can really understand what's going on, business people not wanting to spend the time with the data team. Then there's this talent problem, which is analytics engineers are really hard to find. DBT kind of invented analytics engineers, I think it's sort of fair to say. And the modern stack is modern. Not a lot of people have been working on it for so many years. And if you don't write good DBT, or you're not well versed in exactly how those files need to happen, especially if you're entering that world, you can create so much more of a mess. And this translation of business logic into SQL, it's actually difficult. So it's just hard to find people. And then the workflow side of things, business users will always need to maintain the business logic as metrics change, as definitions change, and data teams will always have to own the code base. So that tension just persists with the same kind of flow. Today, there's two ways people solve the problem. They build their analytics engineering team, then they work with the business users, and they hope that that can work out, or they partner with a consulting team like Data Culture or Brooklyn Data, and then they do that work for you. Maybe they even level up some of the people in your organization, run some training programs. But when it comes to, and this is my story, so at WeWork, I was on an analytics engineering team. I was the data visualization engineer, but working with people to put this in place. I think when we left WeWork, there was 16,000 employees and hundreds of people on the data team, and there's still a data team there. Then we built Data Culture, this consultancy, and we worked with lots of different companies to try to help solve the problem. Preql is fitting into this sort of like no-code solution here. What we want to do is be the sort of UI layer for business users so that they can have input into the metrics definition side of things. And on the back end, we generate DBT, clean SQL that analytics engineering teams can use. What does that kind of look like? I'll show you an early version. But basically, you have your metrics that you can see clearly, and the business user can go in and tweak those metrics. It's not a GUI on top of SQL. It's a UI that's more so, we like to call ourselves like the TurboTax of data modeling. So that's what I'm working on day in and day out to sort of like try to figure out this problem. At the end of the day, it's a design problem in a lot of ways, and our team is really heads down trying to figure that out. But with the modern data stack, there's so much that's been unlocked. Because this is an actionable advice session, I just want to give a little bit of some actionable feedback to the two people that tackle this gap the most. So for business people, this is the advice we like to give. Number one thing is invest in building the domain expertise of your data counterparts. It's worth the time to sit with your data person and really explain to them what your day-to-day looks like and how your decisions are made and could be better informed by data. We're in this remote world now. It's super easy to hop on Zoom, talk to your people, and invest that time. We've seen it work really, really well. Sharing your challenges is like the next step. So why do you want to build the thing that you're asking them to help you build? And then how are you going to act on that? So if you're asking someone to put a dashboard together for you, why exactly are you asking them to do that? And my last point is, again, brainstorming and speaking in the language of problems. So instead of saying, can you give me this number? Or can you tell me how many customers we have? That's great. But what are you going to do when you have that information? Speak in the language of this like very typical problem statement. Instead of saying, I need this, it's just a task someone else has to do. We're losing this much revenue because of this. Now let's try to solve it together. So this is all like collaboration, but we've seen this make a really big impact. And a lot of the work I did prior to focusing only on Preql was around empowering business people to do these things in their day-to-day. For the data people, this is maybe my most contentious point on a slide, aside from my fun blog post. The tension between business analysts and data people is real, but it's kind of okay to let them be business people. And I think like there's a lot of temptations when it comes to all these new tools in the modern data stack. Everybody should be using Looker, throw away the tools they're most comfortable with. And what Leah and I have learned is that it's about driving impact. It's about actually changing the bottom line of your organization. So if your business partner loves to work in Excel and they're really fast, it's not necessarily your job to tell them they can't. It's about working on solving whatever the greater problem is and empowering with them with information in the moment when that information needs to be delivered. And this can go into an even longer point about data visualization and what is the best format of showing people the answers to their questions there's an opportunity to drive impact, and often that is in an email or even in an Excel sheet. So resist the tension to complain. Invest in ambassadors is the counter side of, invest in teaching your data people about the business. We did an amazing program when we were at WeWork. It was called Data Cult, and then it became Data Culture later on. And we were really well supported by our executive team and everybody there to do this work, where we brought business users into a room. It was physical times from all different parts of the company. There were salespeople, there were architects, there were designers, and we showed them slides and we taught them, okay, this is where Fivetran is bringing your data into your Snowflake warehouse. Then we've written DBT, and people got it. And they wanted to learn more. So then we offered SQL lessons and Looker lessons. And I think a lot of companies have done this since, and it was really powerful. But the idea that you have non-data team ambassadors embedded on different teams, like prior to having analytics engineers or a data analyst, that's pretty common to be embedded. There's this ambassadors initiative, and we've seen it work really, really well. Bringing your people into the process and being inclusive speaks to that, but it also speaks to this black box gatekeeping problem where it's not required that everyone needs to be at a level of SQL. I think there's large organizations, Amazon and Google, care a lot about, everyone being a SQL expert. And what we like to say is sure, but if everyone in your organization was a SQL expert, would it actually change the bottom line? Would people be making better decisions just because they can write SQL? And we always believe, no, it's about teaching problem statement definitions. It's about collaborating, and it's about really thinking about that moment when you need data and then you can use it because it's accessible to you, because it's been served up. So bringing in voices that don't necessarily seem like they fit, like I mentioned, we would work with designers and architects and salespeople and marketing in a single room to solve a single problem, has been the most impactful. And when it comes to data, there's a few reasons why this is so important. First of all, especially if you're working with data about the population and the people who are touching that data aren't representative of the population, you're not going to get things that are as interesting. And this brings me to my last point, which is about diversity and hiring actually diverse data teams and diverse business teams who don't necessarily have specific backgrounds learning about how to be the best possible data engineer. This references as well this idea that analytics engineering is pretty new. DBT is pretty new. So people who are experts in it, it's within the past few years. One thing that brought Leah and I together in all of our work was that neither of us had actually learned SQL in a kind of like a professional or like in an institutional way. We learned to code on the job. So much of our work came from hands-on experience. And we've just seen so many times people rise to the occasion. And I was listening to a diversity panel here earlier today. How do you kind of bring in talent that wasn't yet in the field? Because it is such a huge problem, but it makes for much better work. And another way to tackle this problem, and I can't give a talk without referencing this image. One of the most powerful things that I've done in my career was Data Culture in its early days created a partnership with Code with Clossy, which is like Carly Kloss's coding program. And we wrote a data science curriculum for them and taught hundreds of young women data science. And then these people, are going to go out into the world. And now we're starting to hire these young people as interns because it was a few years back, and eventually hoping that they'll join our company. In order to create more diverse teams, there's a lot of creative ways that you can invest back into the community to bring these people in. It's a long-term problem, bridging the gap between the business and the data. But at the end of the day, the only reason we're doing any of that work, to reference my first slide, storing the data, ingesting it, spending all that time writing the SQL to transform it, then serving it up in a very expensive BI tool that everyone needs to have access to, is to make a decision with the information. It's to make our companies better. And I think we are obviously moving in that direction where every company is going to need to make more and more data-driven decisions, and we're going to need to keep storing it. But we're like in this era that's not postmodern stack, but there's been so much that these modern tools have unlocked and changed for the better. How are we going to use it to drive impact? And that's where I'm hoping Preql will fit in, but also in initiatives like this, grassroots initiatives within your organization, external initiatives to bring more talent into the space, and then really investing in having real conversations about business problems at the same time that we're talking about data. Because I think this was from my blog post as well, like there's no real technology issues at this point. It's difficult to do this work, but there's a lot of support there. I'm going to leave 10 minutes, which is a long time for Q&A because I've gone through this quickly. But if you want to come back, Ali, and let people ask questions, I'm happy to answer and talk about it. And reach out to me anytime.
Sweet. Yeah, we can come back up and kind of chat through some questions. We'll give some folks some time to add some in. Right now, the question from Chris is pretty meta of whether or not we will be taking questions. So yes, we will be taking
I've given time for questions because I didn't overdo it on the slides here, even though, and I left time for Leah. So yeah, you're welcome to ask questions about anything.
Sweet. Yeah, we have a couple coming in. First from Zach is, any advice on getting engineers interested or bought into data, generally speaking?
Like the software engineers?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same issue as the business people. And I do think software engineers are actually hungrier than people think for more of a connection to the types of problems that they're solving. And software engineers are building the pipelines that create the data. And I went through this transition. So I used to run Data Culture, which is a consultancy, and all of the engineers that work there were basically analytics engineers. Now we've started this new company, Preql, where we're working with software engineers. We're building a product. We found them to be very interested in creative, and I think the way is to share with the software engineers how everything they're building is generating data down the line that's going to get stored, could have an impact on the business, but won't unless they're thoughtful from the get-go. So from the beginning, thinking through, why are we building the thing that we're building? What are the consequences? And how to get them excited about it. I think it's education, like teaching them and sharing more.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then a question from Dinesh. Do you have any advice for folks who are looking to get started in DBT and kind of build their skills there? And can you share thoughts on its use in the public sector?
In the public sector, yeah, okay. I do a lot of talking about DBT. So at Data Culture, we used to send all our new employees through, like Michael commits, he has this program like Analytics Engineering School. I think Claire worked with him on it as well. Claire, there's like a very small, DBT is such a community. So there's so much access to all of the open source materials out there. Also at Preql, then, we feel like that's a solved problem. I don't like to tackle solved problems. So getting started in DBT, join their Slack if you're not already in it. There are actually programs you can pay for, especially if you've come from an analytics world where you've been a data analyst but not officially an analytics engineer, because there's no school for that from what I know. And then, yeah, the use of DBT in the public sector is tricky. A friend of ours, Lauren Balick, writes about it a lot online, because the issue is, if you're not good at DBT and you haven't done it before, and then you're tasked with writing initial DBT code for a new company, you can actually create a huge mess. So it's one of those things that I think is really worth going deep and learning a lot, like not mastering, but definitely doing some work before you dive in and start writing production code for whatever company you're working for. And that's where the resources online really help, and doing kind of test projects. But I think it's a standard moving forward, and it's such an important tool and so much easier than what we were living with in the past. So yeah, join DBT Slack.
Awesome. Yeah, that is the meta advice that we would give as well. And a shameless plug for Co-Rise, who we're sponsoring some scholarships with. They have an analytics engineering with DBT course as well that Emily Hawkins, our keynote speaker from yesterday, teaches too. And we've heard some really good feedback about that.
Emily, yeah. Go to Emily's program. I've seen people
that sounds great. Sweet.
And get your employer to pay for it.
Yes, truly the beta for that. Awesome. And then a question from Chris. What is the difference between your data ambassador concept and what he's seen as an analytics enablement role?
An analytics, sorry. So a data, I mean, I can just talk about it for a second. What's the difference between data and analytics enablement role? Well, two things. First of all, a data ambassador program is grassroots. It could be like anybody in the organization decides that they're going to get a bunch of people together, and they're data ambassadors already exist. The way this business gap is being closed today is you have these people on different teams that don't necessarily have an analytics engineering background in any way. They're not engineers, but they're really savvy with Excel and they really are hungry for data and they use it to make decisions and they like drive the rest of their team. It's empowering those individuals, getting them together once a month, once a quarter, whatever it is, like Data Cult, what we ran at WeWork, we ran it once a quarter in New York and once a quarter at a WeWork around the world. We would go in over a 5-day period and teach people a bunch of stuff about data and then have them create products that would solve $10 million problems for the company. That's a really typical example of like an analytics ambassador program that people are very, very well bought into because they're letting everybody take time off work to do that. An analytics enablement role is what I'm assuming to be like, an advocacy role or like within a company that's a specific person that all day their job is to like enable analytics across the business. Really awesome. I think I would have enjoyed a role like that, but it's not necessarily something that at least startups can invest in and something, at an earlier stage. And I also think there's a lot of excitement and power that comes from bringing in different voices to the room. That's a single person or a single group maybe that sits. I know Spotify is invested in this sort of thing as well, but it's fun when you bring people from all different teams and they can take a step back and say, yesterday I was really focused on this one problem. Today I'm going to give my input on how we can solve it together. So it doesn't speak to the other side. I prefer the sort of ambassador groups.
Sweet. And then actually a quick follow-up on that. What are 3 examples of like deliverables for a data ambassador analytics enablement role? I guess for each, since we just differentiated between the 2.
Yeah, I mean, there could be similar, but an analytics enablement person maybe is starting this. So running some kind of like actual training program at a certain, whether it's over a period of time or whether it's offered like weekly lunch and learn hours. I think that's a really easy thing to do. Documentation is huge as well, and creative ways to document things. So anybody who joins your organization should be able to access at least some kind of GitHub repo or DBT that they can look at and read in their own time and understand. And if they're not technical, that should be available also, whether it's a Notion document or a video, because that's the easiest way to like onboard people to just understanding where is the data stored, how is it being ingested, then how can you actually make an impact with it, which is the last bucket. So I'm talking about this Data Cult program a lot that we used to run. It was a 1-week program, and at the end of all the learning and the education and the documentation, we asked people this creative question: if you could solve any problem for the company worth $10 million, like what product would you build? And they had to build the product. And it was just an MVP, minimum viable thing. It could have been a Tableau dashboard. It could have been an email automation. Getting employees creative in that way, it's just like the most successful, not just tied to the data side, but also like tied to the company. When you're able to be that creative at work, I think you're more attached to your organization. It helps with retention. People like to do different things. And I think that's what's kind of tough about having one single role, but really exciting about data. Because at the end of the day, you get access to the most interesting information about a business. So my 3 things are like documentation, training, like actual sessions, and then like product problem solving and letting people actually build things.
Awesome. And then again, kind of continuing on questions about the Data Cult programs, do you offer any individual courses on SQL or Advanced Looker? And we can expand this into like, are there any out there in the ecosystem that you would really recommend to folks? And then what is your advice on fully committing to learning SQL?
Yeah, okay, so 2 things. One of the things I think I said this was like, if everybody in your company could write SQL, is it really going to change the bottom line? And that's kind of my take on it. Like, there's a lot of good reasons why you should learn SQL, because it is such a straightforward language and it's so incredibly powerful, and it just puts you in a position of power. Like, initially I was a graphic designer. I learned code because I wanted to have more authority over what I was designing, and then I got into data, whatever. So the answer to learning SQL, everybody who wants to learn SQL should. Should it be mandatory? No, I think it's more about problem solving and thinking about data, and then there should be tools that fill the gaps in between, and we're seeing a new wave of those tools, and I'm building one. I don't offer any courses on SQL or Advanced Looker. If you go to datacult.com, that's our consultancy. They may start to, I'm not sure. I don't run that organization anymore, but it's a place to go. Emily Hawkins would be kind of the number 1 program that I would recommend. I forgot it existed. Otherwise, I would have said it first. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's free online that is worth looking at. So it's multifaceted. If you're really passionate about learning SQL, go for it.
Would
Same with
would you recommend that folks who are like really passionate about learning it try and find some type of like professional project that is in their current job scope that they can get their hands on, or like a side project, or what have you seen be successful with that?
yeah, I think it's important to have like some kind of like hands-on experience, which is what's exciting about some of these programs. Also, there are so many. We worked with so many at Data Culture, the consultancy, so many amazing nonprofits that needed more help. There are so many projects that you can work on, whether they're paid or unpaid or whatever it is, as you're developing those skills that I think are very much worthwhile, because until you write the code and you start to see the problems, until it's deployed, it's not really the same as anything you're going to do in like a playground environment. It's just like not quite enough. So like datacult.com is a place to go, but there's also a lot of resources online when it comes to the DBT community. And then like Overflow, there's a bunch of stuff. Code Academy.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, that brings us right up to time. So I'm glad that you left the amount of time that you did for questions because it ended up working perfectly. But yeah, thank you everybody who asked questions, contributed in chat, and obviously thank you, Gabi, for coming in and presenting and spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it, and we will be back in a couple minutes.